afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is Friday. It's noon. You're in the right place. This is the Rotary Club of Fort Worth. We're so delighted to see you all today. Please join me. We're going to start with the invocation. Elliot Goldman, President, GL2 Partners, will lead us in the invocation, and past President Doug Briley, President and CEO of Warren Douglas Advertising, will accompany us for the national anthem.
Dear God, today I'm going to ask for empathy, compassion, and good judgment for our leaders, for those who hold power over us, for our family, for our friends, and for ourselves. Amen.
Thank you. Please be seated. And now, Deanna Stewart, Vice President of Philanthropy for Cancer Care Services, will help me welcome our visiting Rotarians and guests.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon and happy Friday to everybody. We have quite a few visiting guests today. Yay, that's always a good thing. If you are visiting with us today, will you please stand? Thank you so much to all of our guests visiting with us today, whether you're here in person or on Zoom.
Thank you. And by the way, welcome to those of you who may be watching from your desk, from home, from travels, wherever you may be. We invite you to come every Friday with our Zoom link. And also, I do want to particularly mention some of our out-of-state visiting Rotarians. We have two visiting from Roswell, New Mexico, and I'm hoping for the inside scoop. I want to know what really happens in Roswell. They are visitors, Randall Fluke, Judge Fluke has brought them today, Rotarian Betty Reed and Christine Reed. Thank you so much for joining us in Fort Worth. And also, we have Rotarian John Presley, originally from Fort Worth, but he's been taken to South Carolina by his bride. They're from the Somerville Rotary Club, and John Presley is here with his wife Susie and a mother or mother-in-law, Carol Lee Presley and Judy Waymeyer. Welcome. And John, I need you to join me at the stage. We have a quaint tradition here in Fort Worth, and you will be, I think you'll be delighted. Do you play golf?
Yes, ma'am.
Very good, even better. So some years ago, you would have been greeted with a demure kiss on the cheek and a yellow rose.
I'll take that too.
You may actually prefer this, yeah. So compliments of our club member, U.S. Congressman Roger Williams. For the last 20 or 30 years, the long-distance Rotarian is gifted with a gold-plated golf putter.
Wow.
And I'm sure it's extra lucky. So
Wow.
Send us a picture.
And I got a flag for you, but not a putter.
Well, this is perfect. I have one for you as well.
Awesome. I can take that back home.
Tell us, say a few words about Somerville. Tell us where it is. And
Sure. So Somerville, South Carolina is just about 20 miles from Charleston off I-26. It's, booming area, economic development. I'm looking forward to hearing our speaker today about what's going on in y'all's neck of the woods. I hear a lot of good things going on in our neck of the woods, a lot of growth going on and everything there. But our club is not as old as yours, founded in 1947, but it's the oldest club in our town. So I've served as president, treasurer on the board. I've been a Rotarian for like 17 years, and love, coming back and visiting family and able to bring my wife and let her participate in this. And y'all been so gracious and kind. So I just, look forward to the rest of the meeting here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let me have that flag. Perfect. We'll get a picture afterward.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you all, and thank you to all of our guests for joining us here today. As is our tradition, we accept meeting sponsors, and we would like to express our gratitude to today's meeting sponsor, Karen and past President Larry Anthon, K&L Enterprises. We all know K&L, Karen and Larry, and we know that public acknowledgement is not their style. And we also know they're very generous and quiet. Philanthropic hands are at work here in Rotary and throughout the community. Please allow us to especially say thank you today. And as Tran notes, K&L and Don Boren are our #1 meeting sponsors, but who's counting? So the 4-way test. Rotarians know that this was developed as part of a business strategy by Herbert J. Walker in 1932, when he stepped in to salvage the nearly bankrupt Club Aluminum Company. Since that time, it has become the world's most widely quoted statement of business ethics. And as Rotarians, it is a statement of all that we think, say, and do. Please join me as we recite the 4-way test. 1, is it the truth? 2, is it fair to all concerned? 3, will it build goodwill and better friendships? 4, will it be beneficial to all concerned? And now we're in for a treat. We have one of our Hall of Fame newscasters, past President Gary Cumby, owner of the Cumby Consultancy. Please take the stage.
I can wait. Thank you for that round of indifference. Make me feel as welcome as a ham sandwich at a bar mitzvah. Well, last weekend was really busy. Don't say it, that's Mitch Reitman's deal. No, last weekend we had Cinco de Mayo, or as my cousin, Little Bubba Jr. calls it, Cinco de Margarita, although he never stops at 5. Then on Saturday, we had the Kentucky Derby, or as Little Bubba Jr. calls it, the Kentucky Julep. And we also had the Royal Coronation, which Little BJ calls the Royal Gin and Tonic. And finally that night, we got local election returns, or as Little Bubba Jr. calls it, hey, let's drink whatever they're serving free at those victory parties. Well, all those highfalutin events, and did you ever see so many goofy-looking hats? Even the men were wearing them. And that was just at Michael Crane's victory party. Well, President Biden did not attend King Charles's coronation, but he said he knew the British people would forgive him. After all, he was there for the signing of the Magna Carta. And also, the president has announced his candidacy for re-election. His staffers are already preparing for campaign activities. They're redecorating his basement and they're moving the teleprompter in as we speak. Former President Trump was in London for the coronation, but didn't get invited to any of the fancy events. I think it's because he didn't have a goofy hat for the occasion. But if you ask me, they should have counted his comb over. Vice President Harris is brushing up on her law school Latin. She's planning a trip to several Latin American countries and wants to be fluent. And Ron DeSantis is expected to officially announce his presidential bid later this month. He doesn't have a lot of international experience, and it'll be an uphill battle trying to convince voters he can handle diplomacy, especially since he can't even get along with Disney World. Well, in international news, Russia's attack on Ukraine continues not to go the way Vladimir Putin had hoped. Reconnaissance photos this week revealed extensive modifications being made to Russian equipment in the field. Actually, they're installing backup lights on all their tanks. And tensions continue to escalate between the US and China. We're seeing more and more unidentified balloons in our skies, and even our military is getting nervous. Just this past week, a mysterious balloon passed over Hawaii, headed for the North American continent. And in a related story, the Charles Schwab Challenge golf tournament will be played later this month at Colonial. Scheduled to make an appearance is the Goodyear blimp, towing a banner that says, "Don't shoot." Congressional leaders on both sides of the aisle are considering using artificial intelligence to create legislation. In a Gallup poll, 25% of Americans say they don't want AI used in Congress, and another 10% are uncertain. But 65% would love to see any kind of intelligence in Congress. In entertainment news, Fort Worth's favorite son, Taylor Sheridan, creator, writer, and star of Yellowstone, has agreed to do a TV commercial promoting Fort Worth as a destination. In the commercial, Sheridan removes his cowboy hat, looks into the camera, and says, "Fort Worth, my other favorite F word." And the final item, a new study reveals that 2 minutes of laughter is better for your health than 20 minutes of jogging. So after the meeting, come join me over at the park and we'll laugh at the joggers. The weekend weather outlook, rain chances and temperatures will both be in the 70s all weekend. Of course, there's an 80% chance that the forecast will change, so stay flexible.
And there you have it from the Cumbie News Consultancy. And my hair is a good barometer, so we're in for rain, trust me. So, you know, we're coming up on our 110th anniversary. If you ever take a close look at our framed club charter, which is up in the office, you will see that it was signed June 2nd of 1913. And guess what date is around the corner? And it so happens it falls on a Friday. But, you know, for the last few months, of course, we've been taking a look back at each meeting at some of the unique things that are part of our club culture and club fabric. And today I'm just going to quickly touch on the 7 clubs that I'm aware of that we have sponsored here in Texas. In 1925, a group from our club organized the Rotary Club of Graham, Texas, which of course is where this year's district governor hails from. That same year, we also organized the Rotary Club of Abilene, and we took 125 Rotarians down to celebrate that event. The next year, we started, well, actually on July 4th, 1922, there was a pilot group that went out to San Angelo and visited, and they eventually pulled it all together and organized the club later that year, and they had a special train run with over 100 Fort Worth Rotarians in attendance. In 1927, so there was a streak there in the 20s, we organized the Rotary Club of Grandview. And once again, a train with over 100 Rotarians went out to Lubbock, also for the district conference. 100% of the Fort Worth Club registered to attend. In 1948, we organized the Rotary Club of the North Side of Fort Worth. And then a few years later, in 1951, we organized the Western Fort Worth Club. It got its charter. Eric Hayden was one of our Rotarians, and he resigned to be their president. And then in 1953, ending the streak, we helped organize the Rotary Club of South Fort Worth. So there's 7 clubs that we helped start in our region, and I'm looking into a few more just to double check. But for now, 7's the number. And now if I could have these several Rotarians just approach the stage so we're on deck and ready to go. Wanda Bonder is going to start. She's got an international committee meeting. She's owner of Relevant Wellness. And Bob Byers, James Emmons, and Crystal Galvan, if you could be on deck.
Hi, I get to tell you all about a super fun event that's happening on June 24th from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. It's in honor of World Refugee Day. It's a super fun event. It's really awesome for people of all ages. I definitely plan on taking my kids this year. It's another way to support the refugees that have moved in and are living in our communities. They wear their traditional dress and they serve their traditional food, and there's a lot of their businesses that you can support. And of course, it's sponsored by our friends at Refugee Services of Texas. The other announcement I have is that Refugee Services of Texas has been told they're going to be closing their doors as of May 31st here in Fort Worth. So our World Refugee Day can be a wonderful way to support them as they close their offices and show how much we love all of the stuff that they've done for our international community here in Fort Worth. If you want, you can join the fabulous Fort Worth Report and Chris Kobler and be a business sponsor of World Refugee Day. And if you'd like to do that, just text or holler at me and I'll let you know how to support them in that manner. If anybody has any other questions about Refugee Services of Texas, you can let me know. They have told us we will still be able to serve as a welcome team for another refugee family later this year. Thanks.
Thank you. Is Bob Byers with us today? Oh, there, Bob. Bob is Executive Vice President at Fort Worth Botanic Garden. He's going to give us an announcement about Rotary Plaza. Bob.
Well, first of all, let me start off by thanking all of y'all that have come out to help us over the last 3 years with our plantings out at Rotary Plaza. We had a really good year this year with the daffodils and the bluebonnets. I hope you had a chance to get out there and see them. We're continuing those kinds of projects, but that's not the only intention of the committee. We're also hoping to make some recommendations related to what I hope some of y'all were able to hear Stacy Pierce and Paxton Motherall talk about what's coming across the Trinity with Streams and Valleys. So we would like to look at maybe doing a facelift and a refresh on our side to go with that, some additional plantings and maybe some changes to some of the facilities. We'd love to have input. The committee is meeting at 1:15 today after this meeting in committee of 2. If you've got any interest, come and join us and help us make some suggestions about how we can make Rotary Plaza even better. So thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Now, it's last call for Crazy Pants. James Emmons. Is he here? There we come. You know, there's a $40,000 vehicle courtesy of D&M Leasing if you get that hole-in-one.
Yes. You'll notice up here, we've got the sponsors, which we're all very grateful for people to participate with us. And hopefully the video shows you, give you a little taste of what the exhibition is going to be about. But more importantly, it's going to be a great day of golf on the Ridgely Country Club South course. And of course, I was just speaking to Mr. Knight before the dinner meal. He'll start it up, but I told him what golf is all about. And it's more about fellowship and being together and getting to meet people and know people and enjoying the time. And that's really what it's about. So I would encourage all of you, it's going to be May 16th, which is just 3 days away, Tuesday. And but we still have a lot of people that we want to come and have fellowship. So please sign up if you like to come out for the exhibition, which will be 5:45-ish or so p.m. in the afternoon. There'll be cocktails or Cokes or drinks or what have you, as well as the heavy hors d'oeuvres, and a lot of people sitting around the driving range and getting to know each other and visiting and having great fun. So please sign up, see me, Aurora, and any of us that like to talk about golf, just send me an email or call me. Thank you very much. Thank you, President Shaw. Thank you.
And John Presley, if you're still in town, bring that gold-plated putter and we'll put you up there. And now Crystal Galvan, she has galvanized us with the PBR parade and a special event next weekend.
Good afternoon. It is PBR time in Fort Worth, and today is the first weekend, so I hope to see many of you out there. It is with great pride that I share with you that our club has partnered with PBR, Visita Fort Worth, and the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. We are going to be hosting a meet and greet with PBR, three-time world champion and Texas Cowboy Hall of Fame inductee, Adriana Morelos, on Saturday, May 20th at 10:15 a.m. at the American Paint Horse Association. So I am needing at least 5 Rotarians, or maybe 4, because I think Richard committed to me, to come out on Saturday and volunteer to host that breakfast. Additionally, we will be participating in the PBR parade, which will follow the breakfast at 11:30 a.m., and I am needing 20 Rotarians to volunteer. So I hope that I can count on each and every one of you. You can contact myself, or you can contact President Sean. Thank you. Thank you.
Very good. You know, PBR moved their World Finals to Fort Worth last year for the first time, and this year it's the 30th anniversary. So we expect it will just continue to grow and draw bigger crowds. And now we have one blue badge presentation, Dr. Craig Kneaton. Fabulous.
Trade you. You guys worked hard.
Thank you, Dr. Kneaton. And now we also have one new member introduction. Deborah Connor, Chief Advancement Officer with Cristo Rey College Prep. Her proposer, who else? Bob Mitchell, Executive Recruiter with Whitney Smith.
Thank you, President. Oh, okay.
Yeah, okay, I'm introducing you. Okay. Well, it's my honor to introduce a Renaissance person that many of you already, of course, know, a native of North Fort Worth, a justifiably proud mother of a very accomplished daughter. Deborah has been one of the top medtech and pharmaceutical salespeople in all of the United States. She is a member of the Fourth Estate in that she was an owner of the Business Press, and she is now enabling a lot of youngsters who are from financial straitened backgrounds to be in a work-study program, college prep, that launches them into the future. It's very exciting. We've had 100% acceptances at college, and we've had 19 million plus in scholarships. It's a very exciting program, and Deborah is the director of Major Gifts, so that account means all of you. So take it away, Deborah.
Thank you.
Say the name of the organization here.
Oh, Cristo Rey. I was afraid I didn't want to beat people to death with it. You know me, I'm very subtle.
Right.
So yeah, all right.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, President Sean, and thank you, everyone. Old-time friends, new friends, I am honored to be here. I'm from the north side of Fort Worth, went to Northside High School, then went to TCU, graduate, 1982 from TCU, went into medical device. Well, actually, Buddy Puente, if anyone knows Buddy, he was my first boss, and then went into medical device sales. Had the Business Press. I'm right now working with nonprofits, first time in my life. I've always been an entrepreneur or a businesswoman. I was an executive internationally for an OEM company in medical device and worked in Southeast Asia, lived in Australia. So now I've left that scene and I'm in nonprofits, and it's a whole new world. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, but the most satisfying to be able to work with wonderful children at Cristo Rey. They're not children, they're students and they're young adults. But it's probably not about Cristo Rey, but I have to give a little plug if you don't mind. It's just a wonderful organization. I hope you come and contact me and come see me. We're exclusively serving low income and underprivileged children, and we teach them business skills, we teach them how to get into college, and then like Bob said, we take them on into college with $19.77 million for 40 seniors raised this year. So thank you, everybody. I'm really proud to be here. Oh, interesting about me, I'm a terrible athlete, but I have a daughter who made it to the U.S. Olympic team. She's 22 years old. Her name is Meredith Connor. She was a half-pipe snowboarder and won nationals over and over. And so you don't have to have talent to have a great child, apparently.
Deborah. I was just saying it's about time. We've all known Deborah, admired her, and we're glad you're back in Fort Worth, and welcome to the Rotary Club. And now, let me introduce our Pete Guerin, Rotary past president, 1999 to 2000, president and CEO of the Sid Richardson Foundation, and a longer resume than I could continue on. Please take the stage and let's hear our program.
That would have been a bad way to start. I did that on purpose, Bob. I was trying to get a laugh and or a wisecrack from Bob. I could count on that. So your hair tells you whether or not it's going to rain. Yeah. I wonder why I forget my umbrella all the time. Well, I'm thankful to have the opportunity to introduce our guests today. And first I want to say thanks to Cullum for coming over and meeting with our Rotarians. Cullum, it's a great group to hear your message. Room is filled and folks on Zoom as well that are involved in every aspect of life in Fort Worth. And the work you do is directly related to the future of our community. And this is an audience that will benefit from what they're going to hear from you today. I'm going to start, I've got a long bio as well, but I'm going to start with just reading his title and then I'm going to wing it. So Cullum Clark is the director, Bush Institute, SMU Economic Growth Initiative, and an adjunct professor of economics at SMU. He leads the Bush Institute's work on domestic economic policy and economic growth. His work focuses primarily on the challenge of creating prosperous, high-opportunity regions, cities, towns, and neighborhoods. Well, now to the personal. He overcame a disadvantaged education. He was able to survive an Ivy League education, not one, but 2 degrees. Degree from Harvard, a degree from Yale, and he's done pretty good in spite of that. He did come back to Texas to get his doctorate in economics at SMU. He didn't get into A&M, so more about that later. So, Cullum had a remarkable business career before going into the nonprofit world, working at the Bush Institute, and very accomplished in business and professional life before joining the Bush Institute. He, in addition to the work that he does in his day job, Cullum is passionate about public education. That's a high priority for the members of this club. It's a high priority for the club. And in addition to his day job, he has another day job, and that's he's the chair of the board of Uplift Education, which operates 27, right, public schools. I may have the number off. 41? 41 public schools. So thank you for your service. And yes, sir. Yeah. Thank you for your commitment to our kids. We appreciate that very much. He, and I particularly appreciate this, and I know he's does this well. He's the father of 3 girls. He's a lucky guy. I'm going to close really with my introduction and quote from one of our favorite Texans in Fort Worth. Gary Cumby may be the only guy in the room that's old enough to remember this, but Ich bin ein Berliner. For those who are old enough to remember that, that was a part of a very famous speech President Kennedy gave in 1963 in Berlin the height of the Cold War, had the Berlin Wall, had the Iron Curtain separating free from the communists. And he said that very famous quote, "Ich bin ein Berliner." We are all Berliners. Well, what's happened lately in Fort Worth, we're all Aggies. Very happy about becoming Aggie Land North, and I say this as a Longhorn. And we're so excited about what that is going to mean for our downtown and what that means for our community. So where in the heck am I going with this? I know that's what you're thinking. A lot of people are thinking. As we are now all Aggies, one of our favorite Texans happens to be the chancellor of Texas A&M system, John Sharp. John has really put his arms around this community. Not only is he going to build a $350 million development in downtown, but he was the he was the head of our grand marshal of our Christmas parade. So we think he may be running for mayor next. I'm not sure, but the guy loves Fort Worth. And so with that reference to our favorite Texan, John Sharp, I'm going to read to you what he said about Cullum Clark in the book that he wrote, this is one of his books, The Texas Triangle. The Texas Triangle is a must-read for anyone trying to separate the mythology of early Texas from the modern Texas engine. The triangle between Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, and Houston, that is the 15th largest economy in the world. Whether you are a native Texan or you just got here, the Texas Triangle is a valuable resource that examines economic opportunities in the context of history and with eye to the future. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the author of The Texas Triangle and a favorite of John Sharp. Gig 'em Aggies.
Thank you. There we go. Thank you all so much, Pete. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I am really honored to be with you all today, and I am especially honored to be able to think of myself as a friend and a mentee of Pete Guerin. Thank you very much. I'd also like to say to our visitors from New Mexico and South Carolina, there's going to be, fair warning, a certain amount of Texas patriotism in this talk. So bear with me, but also know that I love your states and have written about them very positively in other places. And I'd also like to say, perhaps most important message of the day to all you moms out there, Happy Mother's Day. So I'm going to talk about the Texas Triangle, which I'll define here in a moment, and the future of cities. I'll say a little bit about why the Texas Triangle model is working on the whole, but also some challenges it will face, including, I think, some that will be somewhat unfamiliar, new challenges we will face over coming decades. There we go. So just here's where we're going. I will be gazing into the crystal ball and making predictions. I would say that probably everyone has their favorite quotes about making predictions. Here's one of mine. Ken Arrow was a Nobel Prize winning economist, and during World War II, he worked for the War Department. He was tasked with leading a team that made weather forecasts, including ahead of the Normandy invasion. And he pointed out at one point to his senior officers, our forecasts aren't any better than random chance. And he got back this famous letter, the commanding general knows that the forecasts are no good, however, he needs them for planning purposes. All right, just a quick word about where I work. My day job is at this place, the George W. Bush Institute, part of President Bush's center, which also has a museum. Can you raise your hand if you visited our museum? Excellent. It's so great to see that. Everyone, please come. I'd personally love to give you a tour. We're very proud of the place. Actually, our organization has just taken it over from the federal government, and we're going to do a great job, I think, dressing it up some. So we are in the business at the Bush Institute of applying what we think of as certain timeless American values that animated and inspired the service of President and Mrs. Bush to problems of our own time. These include freedom, opportunity, accountability, and compassion. And there's a quote inscribed in stone and on a very big wall in the entry to our building, which has this quote from a speech President Bush gave when he was in office. It's a wonderful quote. I like to cite the line, "We believe in private markets, humanized
by compassionate government. As an economist, applying this sentence, I would say, is essentially the heart of my job. We are in the business of both developing ideas and taking action. In addition to being a think tank economist, I have had the great privilege of being involved in a somewhat hands-on way in various efforts here in North Texas. And certainly, as Pete said, my service with Uplift is one of the things I'm proudest of and get the greatest fulfillment out of. So nothing could be more important than what everyone here in the room is trying to do for our kids in public education. At the Bush Institute, the program I lead, we call Blueprint for Opportunity. We are focused on the challenge of, as Pete said, of creating prosperous, inclusive, high opportunity cities, towns, regions, and neighborhoods across America. I've had the opportunity to write about that in that book. So definition here, when we refer to the Texas Triangle, we're referring to the mega region, as we call it, formed by the 4 biggest metropolitan areas of the state: Houston, San Antonio, and Austin, and the Fort Worth, Dallas metropolitan area. Some would say, for our out-of-state visitors, only in Texas would we connect 4 points on a map with a triangle. But as you can see, it kind of works. I've had the chance to apply this material in other places as well. An article in a national publication called City Journal, for example, that we called Big D is a Big Deal. It was really about the whole metropolitan area, so apologize to the FW side of the area. But that happened to get noticed by something called Freakonomics Radio. Can you raise your hand if you listened to that podcast? Okay, so notwithstanding the fact that I appear in 2 episodes of it, I really do recommend to all of you all North Texans 2 episodes that are titled, Why is Everyone Moving to Dallas? Now, I challenged Stephen Dubner, the journalist, to understand they're actually not mostly moving to the city of Dallas. They're moving to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. They're actually moving to Fort Worth in greater numbers than to Dallas, and they're moving to suburbs in Collin and Denton County even more than that. But nonetheless, they called it what they called it. But it's actually very engaging and interesting because Stephen Dubner is a great journalist who came to this story with great skepticism and also with an open mind. And that makes for some really good reporting. And I've had the chance to write about this issue nationally in a variety of cities. So, the Texas Triangle. So when we talk about the Texas Triangle, what can we say? Basically, it's gone pretty well in macro terms. What we have seen is over the last decade, of all of America's 385 metropolitan areas, as the census defines them, the Dallas-Fort Worth metro ranked first of all of them, and the Houston area second for population growth in absolute terms. And if we put Austin and San Antonio together, I should say they are growing into each other, and a lot of it's widely believed by demographers that they will one day be declared to be a single metropolitan area like the Fort Worth, Dallas area. If that was so, they would have been the 3rd fastest growing over the last decade and the fastest growing in percentage terms. We know that what's driving this is an enormous flow of people from elsewhere in the United States into these places. The Dallas-Fort Worth area easily and by a long ways was #1 for the biggest influx of people. And the Texas Triangle as a region is far and away ahead of all other mega regions around the United States for corporate relocations, such companies as Jacobs Engineering, Toyota North America, CBRE, and amazingly, Caterpillar actually moving its headquarters after more than 100 years from Illinois to this area. No one would have forecast that. When you think of the mega region as one unit, which in the book we argue you should, because they share great commonalities and growing interconnectedness, it's a formidable collection of assets that in this region we have the #1 tech center between the coasts, largely in the Austin area, the #1 center for a whole variety of industries, IT in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, engineering, inland goods moving in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. It's the #1 area, IT services, and of course in Houston, the #1 medical center on the planet. Now, this chart and the next one show demographic projections. They come from state demographers in Texas and elsewhere. The 3rd and 4th lines from the bottom, if you're over on the left, are the Dallas-Fort Worth and Houston metropolitan areas. What it shows is that by the end of the 30s, I meant to say, Dallas and Fort Worth and Houston will pass the Chicago area to become the 3rd and 4th biggest metro areas in the United States. Austin and San Antonio, down at the bottom, if you count them as one, will be gaining on Chicago and will probably be the 6th biggest at that time. So 3 of the 6 biggest metropolitan areas in the United States will be in our state. This puts the whole mega region together together as one unit and shows that in the, before this decade is out, the mega region where we are will pass the Southern California mega region to become the third biggest. And in the 2040s, it will pass the whole upper Midwest, everything from Pittsburgh over to Chicago and Milwaukee, to become the second biggest. And that's counting Washington to New York to Boston as the single biggest. So this map just basically shows in cartographic terms where people are coming from and to. It's a pretty simple story. The size of the circle is the population of the place, and the color shows are people moving out in orange or in blue. Very simply, people are moving out of the Northeast and the upper Midwest and away from the West Coast in pretty large numbers, and they're moving into the large metropolitan areas of the Sun Belt and to a lesser degree the mountain states. And it's also important to note that the story of the Texas Triangle and the story of Texas aren't the same thing. If we rank all the metropolitan areas of the state from biggest on down, the next 12 below the four biggest, if you put them together, actually they're not a small place. It's more than 5 million people, but it's actually growing less fast than metropolitan America as a whole. Half the counties in the state lost population over the last decade, and if you travel around our state outside the Texas Triangle, on the whole, you're more likely to encounter economic stagnation or distress rather than the booming conditions that we see here in the Fort Worth area. Let's see. So who's coming? Well, I've talked about people coming from elsewhere in the United States. They skew young, which is why the big metropolitan areas of the state are the youngest metro areas in terms of age distribution of anywhere in the United States. There is also an enormous flow of immigrants, and there are a couple relatively new facts. Obviously, the dominant areas of origin for immigrants coming into the state historically have been from Latin American countries. Increasingly, Asian countries are catching up, but what's really a novelty is for the first time in all of American history, when immigrants come into this region, they raise the average educational attainment level of the region rather than pull it down. We are attracting a very educated group of people from around the world, and we're becoming really, really diverse places. Wallet Hub does a ranking periodically of how socio-demographically diverse places are, and they found in a recent ranking that the single most essentially demographically diverse metropolitan area in the United States is the Houston metro. The Dallas-Fort Worth one is third, with New York in between. So we argue in the book that there is something you could definitively call a kind of Texas Triangle model, that there's some definition to this. Now, when I cite these four elements of the model, I know they might sound like cliches, like they're true everywhere. I would submit to you that they're actually not true everywhere, because no matter what mayors say, we should watch what they do and not what they say. But moreover, even to the extent that some of these things are true everywhere, they're true in a heightened way in Texas, in the Texas Triangle. So 4 basic points. One is that these areas basically want to grow. They are built for growth, and they operate pro-growth, pro-commerce, pro-newcomer policies in ways a lot of other places do not. Number 2, they are horizontally expansive, even more than other places. Everywhere in America, metropolitan areas are growing outwards much more than they are growing upwards. In fact, the scholar Shlomo Angel and a number of colleagues did really fascinating work looking at American cities and cities elsewhere in the world over more than 100 years, and he found that in without exception, every single place that was a built-up urban area early in the 20th century has grown significantly less dense, fewer people per acre than 100 years ago. That includes even Manhattan Island, where the buildings are way taller than they were before. Even so, there's still fewer people per acre. So every place is growing outwards, but nobody does it quite like Texas, because we have neither physical, issues of terrain that limit the growth, but also crucially, we don't have policies on the growing outer edge of our metropolitan areas that block growth. The third point going along with this is, with the horizontal expansiveness, is a tremendous amount of what we call polycentricity. And by that partly we mean the built environment. It means that we have our downtowns, notwithstanding where we are, and Fort Worth has a done a really great job of revitalizing its downtown. Nonetheless, our downtowns are a pretty small fraction of all of the office space and all of the working people in these metropolitan areas, with the exception of Austin, which has the benefit of the Capitol and UT Austin. But in other places, we basically have a whole lot of people living and working in more outlying areas. And in fact, for example, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the alternative, relatively new downtown in West Plano and Frisco along the toll road is bigger in office space and significantly bigger in number of people working there every day than the Dallas or Fort Worth central business districts. Same thing goes in Houston, where the Katy Freeway area to the west is actually bigger than downtown Houston. But also in terms of the political jurisdictions, Collin County alone has more than 30 separate municipalities. In Harris County, more than 2.5 million people live in unincorporated areas of the county where they are governed by school districts, municipal utility districts, and to a certain degree, not at all. It's a radically different way of organizing things than in most other parts of the country. And lastly, tremendous diversity not only of people, but of industries. We live in a time when most metro areas have grown less diverse in their industry makeup. Think Silicon Valley, where very, very high costs of doing business drive out everything that isn't tech, for the most part. In Texas, we have bucked that trend, and all of the 4 big metropolitan areas, even oil-rich Houston, have grown more diverse in their industry makeup, and that is a tremendous source of strength. It is, and I would argue that all of these factors interact and sort of reinforce each other, maintaining reasonable costs of doing business and a lot of benefits. So the model has its benefits. It also has its challenges. Very simply, I've done a lot of work at the Bush Institute that makes the case, again, arguably cliches, but we show it with a lot of data that throughout history and in very recent US history, cities that succeed are places that outperform on a few basic criteria. Above all, they educate their young people better than other places. They out-innovate. They maintain reasonably growth and commerce-friendly policies when other places don't. They provide some reasonable degree of affordable quality of life, even though that's always a challenge in successful cities. They welcome newcomers, and they build strong social capital among the people who live there, which is, of course, what we're doing today at the Rotary Club. All of these, again, interact. I think the basic reason why the Texas Triangle model succeeds is because it simply has outperformed in doing these things on average most other metropolitan areas in the United States. Well, more about that in a moment. There are undoubtedly challenges to the model. One is the extreme distance in our big sprawling metro areas from left behind neighborhoods to fast growing job centers in outlying suburbs. So I've done a very crude picture there. I'm not so good with the technology, but I superimposed the state of Connecticut on the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area. If you started in the heart of left behind southern Dallas and tried to get to work in very fast-growing Frisco, you would cross a distance larger than crossing the entire state of Connecticut, which for all practical purposes is inconceivable for most people. We also have significant challenges with the long-term economic sustainability of our core cities and with ecological sustainability, as so very much of the North Texas prairie goes under concrete. So where are people moving? In a nutshell, a lot of data here, but I'll say it very simply. They're moving in greater numbers to Fort Worth than to Dallas, but above all, throughout the Texas Triangle, they are moving to outer edge, very fast-growing suburbs, places like Frisco, Allen, McKinney, Collin County, Benton County. So a few quick words about several different kinds of geography, and then I want to talk about some familiar and maybe not so familiar challenges. So first of all, on the core cities of the Texas Triangle, very simply, we've got challenges. We have actually the pretty standard challenges of cities everywhere in the United States and indeed everywhere in the world: poverty, crime, congestion, and so on. These are challenges, of course, all cities contend with. But we also have some distinctively Texas Triangle challenges. We have, for a variety of historical reasons, we have an exceptionally segregated pattern of where people live, segregated on income lines, and of course, for tragic historical reasons, there is a heavily racial overlay to that as well. We do have fairly dysfunctional housing markets in the core cities, especially in Austin and Dallas. I will note that I've done research that shows relative to population over the 5 years ending in 2020, I need to update the numbers, Fort Worth outbuilt Dallas for new housing per capita by 3x. 3 times. So bravo to Fort Worth. In Dallas, we have a really severe problem. So some significant challenges in the core city. Traditional downtowns. Again, I do want to compliment everything that's happened in downtown Fort Worth. It has been more successful in revitalizing the downtown, I would argue, than maybe downtown Dallas and probably downtown San Antonio as well, even though I enjoy the Riverwalk. But what I would say is that very simple proposition. Maybe I mean for it to be a little provocative, but I really think it's true. The traditional central business district, as we designed it in Texas in the 40s and 50s and 60s, was a bad idea from the start. What do I mean? Jane Jacobs was arguably the most prominent writer about cities in American history. She wrote a famous book called The Death and Life of Great American Cities, 1961. It's as relevant today as it was then. And what she said is that the intermingling of different kinds of people, different kinds of activities in close proximity is the very lifeblood of cities, but we went in exactly the opposite direction in America. We went with zoning codes and heavily tried to segregate out all sorts of different activities apart from each other and put up, in a sense, walls between them, sometimes invisible, sometimes not so invisible. And what we created is downtowns, in which we essentially said you can't really do anything other than operate office towers filled with white-collar office workers. And then we wondered why nobody wanted to be there after 4:59 on weekdays and never on the weekends. Duh. It really isn't that hard. And we basically created a disaster. And back in 1961, she was pointing out it was already a disaster in lower Manhattan, and it was in the process of becoming that in cities across America. That does not mean that I'm bearish, though, because I think that there's an enormous opportunity for downtowns to reinvent themselves as live, work, play environments. They typically have the best arts assets in the metro area. They typically have some pretty strong bones they could build around. They just have to heavily reimagine land use. Left behind areas. I have the example of Dallas here, but I will say I have had the opportunity through my Uplift job to see pretty similar areas in Fort Worth. I've met Pete at one of them once before. We undoubtedly have some pretty tough left behind areas. Consider Southern Dallas. As it's conventionally defined, we're talking about an area of 600,000 mostly Black and Hispanic residents. This is a place that over this whole century has lost jobs and housing units, not gained them. It is a place that by any standard is very much struggling. The same thing goes, I've had the opportunity through Uplift to spend time in the Stop 6 and Poly neighborhoods, and they look pretty similar. One thing that actually is a huge surprise when one explains this to people on the coasts is that these are not what like Easterners think of as kind of quote inner city unquote neighborhoods. They are places, among other things, of extraordinarily low density, which actually is one reason why it's so economically difficult to build things like grocery stores. So there's a pretty major problem of not enough people and not enough income to support the most basic things that people need for the places to turn around. Here's a graphic display that I hope you all will go back on your own time and look this up, but there's a Harvard economist named Raj Chetty. He and his colleagues have created something called the Opportunity Atlas, very, very powerful online tool. When you first call it up, you'll see the United States, but you can zoom in wherever you like. And what he did is basically, it's one of the greatest big data projects in the history of economics, looking at upward mobility as a place by place, down to the census tract level, very specific places within Fort Worth. You can look at it anywhere in the United States and look at to what degree did people grow up there, who grew up there, go on to achieve some reasonable degree of upward mobility. Green is good, red is bad, yellow's in between. What do you find? In our core cities, Dallas and Fort Worth, it's all either deep green or deep red, and you can see where the red is and where the green is. When you find yellow, it's overwhelmingly likely to be in suburbs, including in the mid-cities between Fort Worth and Dallas. But Fort Worth is very, very red or very green, and in that respect, it looks like the other cities of the Texas Triangle. I'll also just say briefly that we have had really good success in building a kind of new kind of suburb around the Texas Triangle that I refer to as urbanizing suburbs. And by that, I mean very simply that there are places that are not bedroom communities of the suburb of 40, 50 years ago. They are increasingly performing all the functions of a city and doing it in many respects more successfully than the traditional core cities. And I won't go through all those things, but I will note just maybe one surprising point. There's a George Washington University scholar named Chris Lineberger, and he's kind of America's leading spokesperson for the idea, at least in academia, for the idea of walkable walkable places within cities. And he created this concept, walk-ups, walkable urban places. And very helpfully, he produced a number of reports on cities around America. And what he lists them for the Fort Worth, Dallas area. You can just see literally a list of all the ones quantitatively defined. And what do you find? You actually find, he finds that a significant majority of all the walk-ups in the Dallas-Fort Worth area are not in the city of Fort Worth or Dallas. So actually, even the things that core cities are supposed to be good at, in many cases, the suburbs are outperforming. Now, let me quickly, I've got a lot of data in here, and I'd love for you to have the slide deck. Clearly, I'm not going to explain big tables, but let me just quickly note 6 challenges. Housing. Very simply, there's a really strong bad news, good news story. I guess I'll start with the good news, the bad news, excuse me. The bad news on housing is, if you look very simply at the numbers that are on the far left, those are measuring median home price divided by median household income, a reasonable measure of to what degree are the housing markets, in a sense, creating enough supply to keep up with demand and maintaining some reasonable degree of affordability. That ratio in all of the Texas Triangle has gone up by 2 whole multiple points. That's huge over the last decade. It's a disastrous change for low to moderate income people. And it is, I absolutely will pound the table and tell you, it is a result of profound policy failures in all of our core cities. The also bad news is we used to be actually somewhat more affordable than most of the places in the Midwest, but now there is no Midwestern city that is not cheaper than the Dallas, Fort Worth, and Austin areas. On the other hand, the good news is the places that people are leaving for Texas on the coast actually managed to pursue to double down on such disastrous housing prices that actually our competitive edge relative to the West Coast grew over the last decade. And so on that basis, can't quite be bearish. So basic housing question, and the question in the core cities is, can we actually pull it together, fix things like dysfunctional permitting processes and reform really ancient zoning codes and figure out how to actually build new housing in our core cities. But maybe the real future of the Texas Triangle is going to be written in places like the city councils of like Frisco and Trophy Club and all these other suburban places, because it is there that they will decide whether they continue to be anomalously pro-growth communities by the standards of America. And if they turn against it, we're going to have some significant challenges. Second basic point about, I'll just very simply, I already referred to Shlomo Angel. I've got a couple charts for him showing my point in the lower right about declining urban densities. So basic issue here is, I would make 2 simple predictions. The Dallas-Fort Worth and other Texas Triangle metro areas will keep growing primarily outwards. And secondly, a long-standing historical rule, which is that most people won't tolerate a daily commute more than about 30, maybe 40 minutes each way, okay? That means that for these whole areas to keep working as they grow, they must create jobs as well as housing in outlying areas and maintain reasonable degree to connect all these nodes. That's a tall order. That's going to be challenging. They failed to do that in Southern California, and it wouldn't be crazy to think we might follow in those footsteps if we don't do a really good job. Third, very simply, water. I've oftentimes been asked about that, and I thought my answers weren't very good, so I went and did some pretty heavy reading on it. Very simply, the Texas Water Development Board does a plan every 5 years. The current one goes out to 2070. It looks at demand and supply. It shows, a projection for pretty significant increased demand, not as fast as population growth, because they do predict both that there will be a lot of conservation, and they predict that actually Texas agriculture will go down a lot in terms of the total number of, acreages being irrigated. But so there'll be some growth. They predict that from existing surface water and groundwater supplies, it will go downwards, producing in times of drought, about a 7 million acre feet, about 1/3 of all of demand won't be satisfied by the existing supplies, meaning we got to develop new supplies. There are various ideas in that document that illustrate how we could do that, but my friends who know more than me about water all say, yeah, all the things in that list, they have no political way forward at all of happening. So this is going to tax our ingenuity. Fourth point, demographics. I will say this is a national challenge, and we're better off in Texas than every place else for the most part, maybe along with Florida. But very simply, we're an aging society. I'm just pointing out kind of the obvious, but the chart in the upper left basically shows that essentially the working age population in the United States is now growing more slowly than it ever has before in the history of our country. And on the upper right, I think the most undertold demographic story of our time is precipitous declines in out-year, like distant future forecasts of how big the US population will be, just as recently as the early teens, like 2011 or 12. Congressional Budget Office, which has to forecast these things, forecast that the US population would hit 400 million in about just before 2050. Now for the same year, they project more like 374 million. And that's continuing to go sharply down because of fertility rates that keep coming in lower than people expect. So that'll be a challenge for places everywhere. I will say, I meant to say when I got into these challenges that for what it's worth, a little bit of editorial from the podium here. As I go through these challenges, I'd say I am decreasingly optimistic as we go through them. I actually feel pretty good about our ability to address the first three, and maybe even the fourth, but the fifth one, education, is tough. And what this big chart basically shows, again, look at the slides if you'd like to later, but very simply, the Texas Triangle relative to what I would consider to be a number of kind of the principal rivals out there around the United States, clearly underperforms in educational attainment levels. And that is our Achilles heel, if ever there was one. Now, in the middle section, you might imagine like, well, maybe all of our reform efforts are paying off. So as you come down the age cohort, like from the people currently older to the people younger, maybe our gap relative to some of these other rival areas would be shrinking, but that's not the case. What the data shows is as you come down the age cohorts, the gap is growing. So we are simply not performing, and that is undoubtedly a major challenge. I will just say very simply on this slide, there's an enormous question for the future. At some stage, middle of the pack or lower educational results will result in middle of the pack or lower economic results. And Texans won't like that, so we have a lot of work to do on this. I will say that it's possible, given the growth in the population and the inherent dynamism and entrepreneurial culture in Texas, that we could just invent our way to something very different in education. We could possibly out-innovate places that currently outperform us. Let's hope so. We need to. And last slide, and then I know we're out of time, but last slide, I'd say if I'm worried about things, I'd say if one is not worried about this, then probably they're not paying attention, and that is our ability to rebuild some degree of social cohesion, some degree of sense of shared citizenship in our state and in our nation, and ultimately to show that this great democratic experiment can, in fact, sustain itself. So, very simply, I would say on this, we could say all kinds of things about polarization at the national level. I'll say very simple observation here in Texas. One manifestation of this problem is a total collision between very red leaders in the Austin and the state government in Austin, and pretty blue leaders in most of the core cities of the state, kind of purple leaders in a lot of the suburbs. They're not seeing eye to eye, and if they don't start figuring out how to work together, a lot of problems are going to go under-addressed. So I think even at the national level as well as the state level, there are major questions for the future. Can we figure out how to, in a sense, address our most basic problems? Can we actually figure out how to invest successfully in education and innovation? Can we actually figure out at the national level how to solve problems like the spiraling national debt in the news these days? On the international front, can we sustain some degree of support for the idea of the U.S. as a leader and a force for good in the world, or will we continue what I would argue has been a pattern of retreat from geopolitical affairs leading to great challenges? All these things are out there. I will say, in conclusion, that the story is not written in stone. It can end a lot of ways. The choice is ours. I can't help but be optimistic about the future of Texas and our country, but I will say we need more Rotarians, and we need more people who will ask before they speak or act, is it fair? Will it build goodwill and friendship? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. There's about 100 different discussions within that, and you are something of an auctioneer. You breezed us through very quickly. We do have the fabulous slide deck, which we can share, if we may.
Please.
We may, yeah. And thank you again very much for being here. We hopefully can have you back. Maybe you can be our club economist, and we can develop the Clark Index.
Anytime.
You can let us know what direction we're headed. It is a tradition of the Rotary Club of Fort Worth that we present a donation in the honor of each speaker. And these days we do our donations to the Rotary International Polio Plus Fund to eradicate polio. And here's a memento of that donation in this bag.
Thank you so much, Don.
Thank you again. And given the time, I'm just going to touch on these things ever so briefly. Thank you, K&L Enterprises, Karen and Larry, for all that you do. You're very appreciated. The Veterans Committee meets after this meeting, Imperial Room, 12th floor. Rotary Plaza Committee meets in the Camellia Room 2, here on the 12th floor. RILA, if you're interested in being a RILA adult volunteer, call Aurora. Last call for Crazy Pants, PBR, we need some people for the parade. And I hear engines revving. I think that might be President-elect Kirk Driver. Kirk, come up here real fast. He's getting ready to head to Australia.
Hi, everyone. So just letting you know, I won't be here the next couple weeks. Tonight, 10:30, jump on a flight, headed to New Zealand, then to Sydney, and straight into the Rotary International Convention in Melbourne. Mr. and Mrs. Anfin, we will see you there. I also have one more thing. I understand it's a birthday today.
Oh, no.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Sean. Happy birthday to you. Thank you, everyone.
The ladies in the room will understand that my age is decreasing each year. Yes. Ah, okay, well noted. And thank you, President-elect Kirk Driver. Have a fabulous, safe trip. And next week's meeting, we are getting back to our service roots with a special program, Nonprofit Innovation in Fort Worth, led by a panel discussion led by moderator Elliot Goldman. We will have Daphne Barlow-Stigliano, CEO, Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Tarrant County, John Shearer, Executive Director at Academy 4, and Vanessa Barker and Taylor Willis, co-founders of the Wellman Project. And with that, happy Mother's Day to mothers everywhere. This meeting is adjourned.